Yeah. So basically, to tell you about Lottie from my life spent with Lottie, starting at really finding the trunk. I was, traveling in the hill country to Bandera, Texas. We had to stop over for a while. And we walked into the Frontier Times Museum, and it was funky at that time because it had a taxiderm lamb with two heads. It had rattlesnakes, even some Ming Dynasty jade, pieces that had been collected or given. It was a really pretty bizarre place, but there was this table and there was this little trunk. And it said, a little curled up card that said, this trunk once belonged to the famous woman gambler Lottie Deno, who disappeared off the Texas frontier with over 40,000 in winnings. That's when I asked the docent, what is this about? She said, this is Marvin J. Hunter's museum, based on his magazine, Frontier Times. And this is the last book he wrote. But he died, and his children pulled all of his notes together. So that's what really started me to seek the knowledge that he missed. I had lived in New Mexico. I knew New Mexico. I understood that she was buried in New Mexico from the book. And so there was a relationship already at that point. And in fact, Steve said at that point, this would make an amazing movie. He actually said that to me. And I said, okay, I guess it really would. But I'd never written anything. I had a lot of problems that stemmed from my growing up that were hindering that part of me. I'd done oral history, at other places on the LBJ Ranch. I did over 12 years off and on of oral history on the cattle industry and the early family and the folklore and foods and all of those things. So I was accustomed to talking about the past. And I'd also grown up with Texas Ranger that lived next door and the grandson of Ulysses S. Grant that used to tell stories when I sat in the grass and listened to him talk. So those were the kind of people that I was attracted to. And my grandfather, the one that survived for my lifetime, he had been from Mississippi, and he taught me everything a child should know about equality, how not to be prejudiced against a man with black skin. That was one of the things that really stirred my mind into equality and understanding. Not only that, his daughter, my aunt, had baby dolls that were black. I grew up with armloads of little black baby dolls that were beautifully formed and made, and clothing. And I grew up with my other little white dolls. It was so, and there was just this mellow understanding in that side of the family. So it was a very interesting time because I was being educated on their lifetimes. So when I was reading about Lottie and her relationship with this 7-foot-tall black nanny, I go, wow, this is amazing. This is wonderful. Look at this friendship. And truly, that affected me, okay? So besides all the cowboy and Western dramas that I would watch as a kid. So I was pretty much, after working with Ava and hearing the stories of the Johnson family, in post-Civil War America, I'm indoctrinated. And I began my search, began to learn who Lottie was. And my research took me to libraries and looking for books and looking for articles. And, I reached out. I wanted help. because this was a whole new ballgame for me, was to decide that I'm going to write a book and do this, or maybe make a movie or do this. And so what really transpired was I began to find facts about her. And then I learned about the people of Deming, New Mexico that were there. And I began to make phone calls, and I began to talk to people. And they began to tell me stories. And so I made the trip. I made the trip to New Mexico, and I began to interview people, get to know people, take notes from people, and accumulate the information. They had firsthand accounts. I've got letters, okay, of firsthand accounts about Lottie. And the next thing that I was also asked to come to New Mexico to design a Western set. I had been trained in art, so I went to Tularosa, New Mexico. We moved there, and that opened the door even more for me to do research on Lottie. And so after that project crashed, I ended up in Santa Fe in the museum, the archives. And that's when I found the Wolfville books. I found a complete section of the Wolfville books that were written by Alfred Henry Lewis. And there was one particular book called Pharaoh Nell and Her Friends. And that book was about Lottie. And I could see her from what I had read, what I had researched. And so that opened up another portion of my understanding of who this character was, how fun she was. So it really came down to research. Then when I said, who is this Johnny Golden, this jockey that this young girl back in Kentucky fell in love with and ran away with and was shunned by her family, because that's the story. What happened was, I always love clerks in a history library who can find stuff for you. And so I got on the phone and I called in Austin, I called the Texas Archives, and I said, I am looking for some kind of document about a thief, an outlaw named Johnny Golden. Oh my gosh, out of the blue, here it came. It was Fugitives from Justice, which was compiled in the 1860s and 70s of all of the criminals that were being rounded up in Texas. There he was.
Was there a picture?
Johnny Golden, horse thief. He was wanted. So I knew Johnny Golden was a real person, a real character. But by this time, I was absorbed in all of the aspects of San Antonio, what life was like, and began my research on what was San Antonio like. But the thing that happened was I began to see her living. I began to feel her story. And it was still, I didn't have enough on Kentucky. That was the hard part on the first book that I wrote, because there was nothing there. I had traveled to Kentucky. I went to where she said she was born in Warsaw. Okay, I met with Dr. Bogardus. I listened to stories about travel, what did the steamships look like that went down the Mississippi? And of course there was one sitting there, an old one. So he was an expert. So I got to meet these. I went to all of these areas, Keeneland and all of the racetracks that I could find. Again, I was putting my foot in her footsteps. That's how I wanted to understand her. So what happened, all of this, again, I looked for slave lists. I looked for Poindexters because Mary Poindexter was her name. But then in San Antonio, I wanted to know where she lived. She had owned a home, it was said, in the King William district. She had met Frank Thurmond there at the University Club. All these names were fitting in. They were all real. They were all places that could be described. Also, I looked into what happened during this Reconstruction period when the Union Army was occupying the area, and the orphans were in such a disarray. There were so many orphans. A little black church started up, and apparently that Mary got involved in that. That was one of the things that was said, that she did get involved with the orphans. She did not teach them how to steal. She was helping them not steal. I learned Mary's character, okay? She was helping them. But the thing that, I'm just kind of giving you an example of how my whole life had to go through her whole life, physically and mentally, in order for me to reach a point that I'm at today with her story. And so basically, again, I wrote the book. It's in the book, told the stories, interviewed the people. But it gets more interesting as I've done that, because we had the Wolfville books to go through, where I was able, by reading some of the Wolfville stories that were written by Alfred Henry Lewis, illustrated by Frederick Remington, illustrated by Marchand, famous Western artists, okay, I was able to, again, get a pattern of her personality. He wrote it in kind of a hick farm, which she didn't like, but the language was I don't know how to describe it, but caricature, and but he was touching on all the people who were in Fort Griffin at that time, in a place called the Flats, where she gambled, where later, as I had the opportunity. As all this is coming together and I'm writing and doing this, the opportunity came for me to reach out to Leon Uris, who wrote Gunfight at the OK Corral. And it was a pleasure that I got to share with him before he passed away the story of Lottie Deno. So I did get to do that, and that was really quite an honor to be able to talk to him about it. But I want to go into her story, because we know that Lottie came from a well-to-do family in Kentucky. We know that she fell in love with this young jockey. We know that since her family was well-to-do, they did have slaves. Mary Poindexter was her nanny. We know her father died in the first fighting. Well, now where is all this taking place? That's a big question. I've got the answer. But to tell you all, that was her story. So she and Johnny ran off together, or she was first sent away to Michigan, where she ran out of money that they had given her. So she starts gambling. He comes and finds her, and they hop aboard, the next barge or the next, paddle wheel or whatever it was, and decide that they're going to go down the river. During the start, the fighting had already started in the Civil War. Okay, Morgan's raiders had already come through, and the Union forces were moving into Kentucky. So all this was going on while these two young people were in love, and Mary went with them. And so, as a lookout at times for Lottie, they go down the Mississippi. My feelings is that Mary kept her separate, but because she was her nanny, and the status from which she was from, he was her fiancé, maybe? I don't know what really went on in the bedroom, but I do know that there was some sort of a masquerade between the three of them. I would assume that naturally. And then again, when he gets in trouble and shoots someone, has to jump ship, and run to San Antonio. He was going to run to Texas, okay? But he would find her in New Orleans. Well, that left Mary and Lottie traveling down the Mississippi that she had traveled down with her father when he was trading horses in New Orleans and gambling and doing these things, according to what she said about herself. This is very important. So in New Orleans, they stay there for a while, and then they go to Texas after the war, during the Reconstruction. And again, back to San Antonio was definitely a Hispanic place. People spoke as much Spanish as as they did English. And then there was, French had been in Texas at that time too. But so there's a lot of different kinds of people. But what fascinated me about San Antonio, as the gambling was so big as business, that they were actually pushing wheelbarrows of gold coins across the plaza in San Antonio. So, I mean, imagine this. Okay, let's just take the cultural concepts of her life. What she had learned with her family, the Cajun world, the French world in New Orleans, she experienced that. Now she's in this Spanish environment in San Antonio. Foods are different, people are different, and she'd also seen slavery. So, wow, what an education this woman has gotten before she's in her mid-20s. And so, anyway, it goes back to all that. And then, of course, we know Johnny catches up with her. She's already met Frank. There's a knife fight. We know all that happened. Frank flees. That's what happened. That's what they say has happened. That's what she told. So we have to take her word for it. And then, of course, she went looking for him to Fort Concho. And there they called her Mystic Maud. She would order her dresses from Paris. She was always called Elegant. And it was there, of course, when the handle was given to her by a drunk. It was either there or it was up closer to Fort Worth where it happened. But it kind of gets, when people talk about it, they say Concho, and then some people say it was in Fort Worth, but area. So he yelled at her, honey, with winnings like that, you ought to call yourself Lottie Deno. And they say that's where she picked up the idea. Instead of being Mystic Maud, as the gossipers called her, she became Lottie Deno. She thought that was fun. So she either heard that Frank had shown up, because the stage lines, the connections, people passing through. That was one of the things that Ava Johnson Cox taught me. She says, honey, I can walk across Texas and know somebody. And that is how communication was constructed in the Old West. You had to leave your name. You passed this form. Hi, how are you? This is who I am. Are you in this town? So communication, she was right. She could go all the way across Texas and obviously find somebody that she knew, a family that she knew, or someone. And it's still kind of that way, because I could follow the names and see the names from where they go. So it's an interesting connection there. But so she ends up there. She went through all of the Big Nose Kate stuff, Monty Bill, all of the other gamblers, Doc Holliday, who apparently she met on the stage from Concho to Fort Griffin. Now, the other thing that's fascinating to me is the comfort zone of the fact that it was a place of the Buffalo Soldiers. She was very comfortable with that. And yet she was invited so often to participate in parties and things at Fort Griffin because she was such a lovely person. So this characterization, and in the book, I have the book interwoven. She's spoken very highly by the author of that book, which was written a long time ago. And so we know that she made quite an impact, her personality. Poker really came in later. It's just a Hollywood thing. It was easy for people to say, play poker. The big game was faro. That's what the bettors did. And if you look at all the artwork, you will see a faro box and a lot of the Western artwork. You'll see some card tables, but were they really playing poker? You don't know unless you can see exactly what was happening on the table. An artist depicted that. So anyway, we go from that. I do know that when she did leave Fort Griffin, she bought the trunk from the Sheriff Jacob, there. And leather trunks were prized in Kentucky. They still are to this day. If you go to a fair in Kentucky or Indiana, you're going to find hand-carved trunks of leather. They're just absolutely gorgeous. And so it was a dear price that she was willing to pay to have that beautiful trunk. So it's said that she filled it full of winnings, up to 40,000. That's what Hunter said when he put the card on the trunk in his museum. So she had to leave, and this is what I learned when I got to Deming. Okay, Frank had found her. They had found each other. They had lived in Fort Griffin together. Johnny did come to Fort Griffin looking for her, as he had found her once before in San Antonio. So basically what happened was Johnny is killed. She had a lot of friends. If he was creating problems for this particular beautiful woman who was loved by all, anybody could have killed him. So he's buried there somewhere. So anyway, you go on to where did she go? Well, Frank actually had a mine in the Hillsborough area. He was looking for silver. And so basically she went there to meet him. And I think their relationship really began right there. But I learned from Patty Israel in Deming that she arrived on the back of a buckboard that was driven from Fort Griffin by the Wright brothers. That's all I know. The Wright brothers, these two brothers. They were the W-R-I-G-H-T, the Wright brothers, okay? And what they had done is they gave her she's apparently just disappeared from her little adobe house at Fort Griffin and was gone. And so Patty explained that she showed up in New Mexico as she told the story. She rode there on the wagon with the Wright brothers. They were shipping, they were taking goods to the mining camps because that's how they made money. And so they were taking a load out to the mining camps. And so anyway, from there, of course, Lottie went on to Silver City. She ended up in Deming. And she taught Hebrew. She was partially responsible for helping to raise the money to build the Episcopal Church. She taught Hebrew. She came back to her roots. She was educated in an Episcopal school. But the reason she could teach Hebrew is not so much that Johnny was in her life and taught her. Hebrew was taught at that time as part of the language. Just like Latin was taught, that was all taken out of our school systems at one time. They no longer, indulge people in these wonderful languages.
So they can't go back.
Yeah, exactly. So now, where all this is heading, and as I say, these relationships, we have to go back to Alfred Henry Lewis, because when he wrote the Wolfville books, and he actually, I have been told, traveled out to Deming, where he was proud of his book, and she wanted nothing to do with the way he had depicted her in the book Pharaoh Now. If you want a copy of that book today, it's $2,000 a copy. Well, he didn't write anything that was probably real. He just made these caricatures of all of these people in the American West when he wrote this series of fiction telling about this crazy, novels, Yeah, it's Dan Quinn had, run away and met all these people and gone back and become a writer in New York and hung out with Teddy Roosevelt, William Randolph Hearst, Frederick Remington, the whole gang. They used to drink beer together. Oh, and I have letters from Roosevelt to Quinn. I have found those in the Roosevelt Library. So I know all these relationships are real. And it's also very interesting. Hearst was fascinated by these stories for this reason. It's because his parents, George and Phoebe, had struck it rich in Silver City and the silver mines. So he was intrigued to hear about these two characters that had ended up there from and all the stories about her and him, Frank, as Cherokee Hall, etc. That's what he called. Frank was Cherokee Hall. She was Pharaoh Now. So it's a love story. But anyway, Lottie had an interest in politics. And she encouraged a young man. One of her best friends in Deming was Wandra Pollard, who became the wife of a maritime man who turned up in Deming, Ike Smalley. They married, and Ike decided he would go into politics, and I'm sure that Lottie was encouraging that. And this is where I come to the greatest knowledge I have of her life, the most important knowledge I have of her life. I was able, during this sequestering from COVID and all of stuff that everybody went through, I would research more, and I was looking for history in Kentucky. And that is when I found a big missing piece to Lottie's story. Because, I can tell so much more, but it's written down, so I don't have to. There were Tompkins, and now my publisher put Thompkins in my book. It was Tompkins. She was hiding when they registered for their marriage license. She was still hiding her identity. She didn't want to be found. She had reached the point of maturity where she knew she'd made a couple of mistakes. And but what you find in Kentucky is that there's these four men served in the Kentucky legislature. Elias Tompkins from Mecklenburg County, Elias Tompkins from Mercer County, they're the same person, Gwen R. Tompkins from Fayette County, Christopher Tompkins from Barron County. And it was Christopher that led me to some answers. Because it really was not possible, perhaps, that these men were her father, but could their sons have been? I've done lots of research here. I would say that Christopher is not, but that Gwen could be her father. He would be quite a bit older than the mother. But I believe because Fayette County is up closer to if she says she's born in Warsaw, because all those records were burned, birth records and everything there. It's possible Gwen, or a son of Gwen. However that is where it could be. So definitely she is a member of this family. And I found only one birth record, but it's not her. It just, I thought I was onto it, but thus far, the entire state of Kentucky, I have not found a birth record. But there's a historical document, and I'm just going to begin it this way and just read you some of this. It's the history of Judge Christopher Tompkins. I am assuming he is her uncle. And it says, the times of long ago, Barron County, Kentucky, is where this is from, okay? The life of Honorable Christopher Tompkins and family. Christopher Tompkins was born in Virginia in the year 1780, though we do not know in what part of Virginia. You got to think about what Virginia was like in 1780. He was the son of, and this is what's important, he was the son of John Tompkins, who immigrated to Fayette County in 1794, but who died before he was permanently settled. Gwen T., the oldest son, then purchased the beautiful farm 3 miles north of Lexington and settled the family there. Now this is for Christopher, the younger. He went to live with the Honorable John Breckinridge, senator, a man of considerable repute at Cable Dale in Fayette County near Lexington. Christopher lived with him a number of years, and while there studied law. Okay. He had the advantage of a legal teaching of Mr. Breckinridge, also his library, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so Christopher became quite known as a scholar. He studied Latin and English and grammar and arithmetic. He became a arithmetician. Okay, so anyway, he was quite well known. Okay, and this document goes on to talk about his career. So the family's prestige is extremely high, as well as all members having been members of the Assembly, the Kentucky Assembly. He was a circuit judge from 1809 to 10. He also married into the Logan family, Logan's Fort, another of the most prestigious families. He married Theodosia Logan. Anyway, he went on, I'm just kind of giving you a brief. He went on after to have a career in Washington. Let's see, he had a very strong political life. Anyway, I have this entire document, and I just want to say, it turns out that obviously she was from the Logan Tompkins, Gwen Tompkins, this family. And this is why they were all into horse racing. And there is one other very significant thing. It's how the judge died. There's Logan County, and there's Barron County, and there's Christian County. All of these areas are dominated by the Tompkins family, and not only that, the Poindexters. So I have located the Poindexter relationship and the Tompkins relationship in these areas. He was also very, very pro-emancipation. He ran for the Whig Party. As I said, he served in Washington as a senator. And then he was appointed to several things. He taught law. And his house, which I do have a picture of, his house that he built for his wife, Theodosia. Now, I say this is her uncle. This also, just so you can't really see it, but I'm just saying, this was turned into an Episcopal school where I would say Charlotte was educated in this family. So this is where my research has taken me at this time. So I am very aware that her influence growing up stayed with her every single step of the way throughout the West. He was actually, during the Civil War, I think it was George Poindexter was appointed as a local, as a governor. So they were all very prestigious as well. I think Mary, if she took the name of her slave owner, it would be a prestigious name herself. So I'm at that point with it, and most of the documents are owned by universities, and I'm still researching all the time, but I know that obviously she was from this family, and it was very prestigious. And so, plus the horse racing. The house that he built for his wife was on Race Street. That's where they race the horses. And this is in Glasgow, Kentucky. So I've got an Episcopal school, and I've got the family name, two names. And the deep dive now, maybe with the internet, I'll be able to do more, but I think I know enough now to say that I could see why she was the person she was. It was also a time, which a lot of people don't understand, there was a governor of Mississippi who actually married a black woman who was a slave of his. And he actually took her to Washington, D.C. as Vice President of the United States. And she was not accepted, which is fascinating to think. But Christopher Tompkins was a very good friend of theirs. So, I mean, all of these relationships prior to the Civil War were fascinating. Now, Christopher Tompkins sided with the Confederacy. The family sided with the Confederacy. Now, that's a good question that should be answered, all the time in Washington and everything, but still, it was a crazy time, and I've tried to disseminate as much information as I can. But there's so much more to her life and her story than just being a gambler in the American West. I had a rabbi from Arizona write me a letter, and he felt that the Tompkins family had roots in Judaism. And he offered that to me. And he thanked me for writing the book. And like I said, it was just a skeleton because he wrote 3 books and only one went to the publisher. But
did he explain why he thought that?
Her relationship to the Lindauer family and their devout Judaism in Deming, and their family relationships, I guess, in Arizona as well. So I have all those letters. So I'm going to donate all this to Texas A&M eventually. Anyway, here's a funny story about Lottie and Deming. And that is when somebody made a wisecrack about her being, not a whore, not a decent woman. And there was a man I got to interview called Malin Everhart. His dad owned the largest cattle ranches in all of New Mexico history. And he was like near 98 when I sat around and ate ice cream with this guy. And with Ike Smalley, the senator, we had such a great night, that Steve and myself with my husband and I, with these two men reminiscing about their lives and enjoying their company. But he said, yep, I did it. I challenged him, the man who said that, to strap on his gun and meet me in downtown Deming. The man did, and Malin backed him down. Malin was 18 years old when he did that, to stand up for her honor. Now, here's something else that I have. This is very important to me, because this right here, come on, here it is. When my book came out, the people who owned the YO Ranch, and this is a horrible, horrible picture, and I'd love to be able to have somebody find this, but this is Josephine Bennett McDade of Kerrville. And this was in 1998 when this was sent to me. And her godmother was Lottie Deno.
Wow.
So Frank's brothers ended up in Kerrville and Bandera. So we have
Home up this way.
okay, we have a lot. We have a lot. It's a terrible picture, but that's Josephine, and Lottie was her godmother. So, it's like she's just been part of my life. So it's pretty special. But the Thurmonds, I understand, will come to an event in Bandera when something's put together, I think, in February. So they're going to start showing up. So it's going to be kind of fun to see that. But let's see, I'm just thinking of the bits and pieces of, Doc Holliday. All those people were in her life. And there's another thing a lot of people don't know, but John Selman, who was considered an outlaw. At one time he was a lawman, in Griffin, and then they say he went bad, which did he or did he not? His family absolutely refuses to accept the fact that he had a Mexican wife and a Mexican family. But I was explained to me that John Selman and his wife would visit Lottie and Frank in Deming frequently by coming across the border from Chihuahua. Mm-hmm. So those things happen. And Lottie and Frank in Deming, they lived through raids from Pancho Villa and, all kinds of things that were still going on in the West in their life. So much adventure. Like I said, there's enough in Fort Griffin alone. But to think that this young woman, she just went into this world and absorbed all of this real life. Because most people just sit in one place and do very little. But she absorbed all of it. When Edison decided to create the film projectors, it became such an exciting time. So everybody wanted to get into the film business. And of course it had started much earlier. But basically, Alfred Henry Lewis wanted to make film too. So they made the first film called Pharaoh Nil. And then there was the film Gunsmoke. And then that evolved, as you know, into the radio series. And I have pictures of all the actresses that played those roles. Louise Fazenda and the other one here, that I had just a minute ago. Where are they? Here are my girls. Okay, actress Patricia Palmer. She played Pharaoh Nell. And then we had, of course, Louise Fazenda again. And then we have Margaret Gibson, who was on the radio series. So all of these, and then of course, my dear friend, before she passed away, and I did not get out to LA to meet her, but Gunfight at the OK Corral. And she did give me the full rights to use her pictures from this movie if ever we needed them. So I love her dearly. One day after reading my book, the phone rang, and it was Rhonda. And that's how I met her. So it was just really special. But the other thing, I guess I could say that I will give credit, of course, Amanda Blake for Gunsmoke was the other one. And an interesting thing occurred from a woman called Dolly Cole, who was from here in Texas. And Dolly visited me in Santa Fe when I was writing my book. And Dolly was headed out to where they were filming the Maverick series with Jodie Foster. And she just happened to know the whole story of Lottie Deno when she got there. So I'm going to give Jodie a high five for the fact that I think she got a little specific information for that role herself. So, you know, she did carry a little bit of the character into, in my imagination, you know, so I would give her credit as being another woman that kind of fell into that place. But anyway, that's it. There's been a lot to this person's life, and it still carries on, and people don't know her the way I know her. And people need to know her the way I know her. I really, really wish they could really meet this incredible woman